Welcome back to Brothers in Boots. My name is Mike.
My name is Jeff.
And today we'll be talking about the differences in Indonesian welts, specifically the differences between a Weltschone or a stitch down Norwegian welt and rolled Norwegian welt, and kind of what's different about them and why you'd pick one versus the other.
So, I guess we'll start with Weltschone.
Yep.
Which translates from
Dutch to
field shoe in Dutch.
Yep, and this is Weltschone right
and
here.
Essentially, I mean, it sounds fancy as fuck, right?
Yep.
But essentially, Weltschone is a Goodyear welted boot where they flipped the leather outward like you would in a Norwegian rolled welt that we're used to seeing. So the leather ends up sitting on top of the midsole. And I mean, that's it. I mean, it is a Goodyear welt. I mean, it's a hand-done Goodyear welt, but it's a Goodyear welt,
yep.
Which of course means that there is a pocket of space inside of the midsole that needs to be filled, which we can assume that they're filling it with some quality cork. Could be some felt, I guess.
Weltschone might be leather, since the cavity for Weltschone is going to be uniform. This is a good candidate for leather. This one might actually be a leather filler. And in wearing this one, this is a shinky emerald green shell. I actually feel like this one might actually be leather.
I would like it better if it were leather. I guess I'd have to ask the builder at the time what they use for a filler. I'm against fillers in general. If I can choose a construction that doesn't have it. Which is, I guess if we veer off a little bit here, I guess we could talk about these cavities and how they're filled and why they're filled. And I mean, that's part of the construction choice, and it's part of what the builder is envisioning for you, the wearer, when you buy them. Like, cork is what's usually picked. And cork is picked by a lot of them at a lot of levels. And cork it's more malleable. So the cork is going to quicker and more easily let your foot go down into it and make it into a custom fit. And for a new shoe buyer, you're getting that feeling quicker. That's a good thing. But if you think further along, that also means that boot is probably going to start not fitting well faster. That cork, that's what's being used, is going to eventually clump up. I don't care how quality the cork is. I believe it's going to bunch up. It's going to start breaking down. It's going to start going into places where you don't want it and not staying in places where you want it. And I don't like the idea of it all.
Well, it depends on how big the cavity is too, right? So like a properly built shoe, that cork layer is going to be very thin, and clumping is not going to be as big of a deal. Clumping is generally seen in like a pair of Red Wings. That's a Goodyear welted shoe with a 2 to 3 millimeter cavity or more, right? A very large cavity. Whereas in a lot of hand welted, sometimes we're talking less than a millimeter of cork filler, if even that. There's not enough space for it to really kind of move around in the same way. And the quality of cork filling does help. And some builders do leather fillers, but there are a couple downside to leather fillers too, and it's the same downside to just traditional stitch down boots as well, and that is not all leather is uniform throughout it. Like, leathers have different weird inconsistencies. Maybe they have soft spots, maybe they have hard spots, and in the process of putting a leather filler in, skiving it down perfectly, you miss a bump. That bump is going to persist for ages, whereas cork will work around that bump quite a bit quicker, if the bump ever goes away. If it's sitting over the top of a stitch, it might never go away. So there are, so like, for example, if we take someone like Gabbard, who uses leather and cork as a filler, first all the stitches are covered with leather and makes a uniform cavity, and then the cavity is filled with cork. Now, obviously, someone like Gabbard at the level he's doing it, that's going to be an extremely thin layer in comparison to like someone like Red Wing or Grant Stone or anybody that uses a Goodyear welt machine, right? So there are ups and downs to it, because in some of the stitch down boots that come out of like the Pacific Northwest, there are guys that have gotten bad batches of insole and midsole leather that the boots have just been extremely hard and more or less needed, you know, Obenoffs dumped inside of them to get them to start breaking in after 1,000 hours of wear. It's not common. The good boot builders will notice that there's a problem.
How do you feel about wool as a filler for the cavity?
Oh, for a squeak pad, it's great, but once again, it's got to be a very thin layer. It can't be, anything probably bigger than a millimeter. It definitely not something like I think you're referencing like Doc Martin specifically, that uses a very, very thick piece of wool. Like I think that thing's like 3 or 4 mils. Obviously, that's a problem. But you could use it. I mean, a couple brands have been caught. I don't want to say which one aloud because I think they don't do it anymore. But there was a brand at one point in time when they cut it apart that it looked like a recycled carpet pad in there.
Oh yeah, lots of brands have done that.
Well, I mean, of modern brands people know and like right now, there's been 2 off the top of my head that I know. Boots from like the 2016 time period have been opened up that basically has what looks like carpet pad in it.
I guess it. Will you confirm it?
Sure.
Alden.
No.
Oh, okay. It seemed like something they would do.
One of them was the Wolverine 1,000 mile. So.
I'm not saying I think wool is bad. I think I'd rather have wool than cork.
Yeah. I mean, there's but between it being a squeak layer and being slightly more insulating, yeah. I mean, there's, as long as it is a reasonably thin cavity, I think there's lots of good alternatives to leather for a number of reasons. But the key there is reasonably thin. That reasonably thin part is extremely important. Like when we're talking more than 1 mil, like 2, 3, 4, 5 mil, we're running into a very serious problem. But anything 1 or less, you have some options. I mean, I would say I would even go for a wool filler in that area if you were like making a winter boot that's already insulated. I would think the ability to add some wool in there, because that's where most of your heat is lost, if we're being honest.
Right.
I mean, so yeah, there are some rooms for improvement there if the cavity is thin enough. Now, the good news about Indonesian makers, which is why we use the word Veltshone, because that's what they do, is they do that Veltshone depending on the maker one of 2 different ways. What Jeff was talking about was what's known as whip stitching, where the upper gets sewn directly into the footbed and then is flared out in a mechanism that you can't see where it's done. And it's essentially a combination of using the liner, more or less, right? And the second kind is some of the makers, Tahura and Renov specifically, their Veltshone is actual real stitch down. There is no stitching. It's a true stitch down. This pair of benzines, I'm not entirely sure. Based on the way it's constructed from above and how far some of the stitching goes, it has a look like it's true Veltshone, or sorry, true stitch down and not just straight Veltshone, but I'm not positive. I stick my hand in there. Can I feel?
Did you just say that Tahura's Veltshone is not actually Veltshone?
Yes, it's a true stitch down. His is an actual flared out stitch down. This one kind of feels like it's got a little bit of a ledge on the inside, so this might be whip stitched. Can kind of feel it.
So then, I'm almost getting ahead of myself because we haven't discussed the Norwegian rolled hand welt, but I'll do it anyway. Why? How would Tahura's Veltshone be different than a Norwegian rolled hand welt then?
All right, because his Norwegian,
that's both a stitch down.
Yep.
No, it's not, because okay, so you're
Yep.
saying that his Veltshone has no separate welt.
Correct.
Going on at all.
Yep. Yeah, his is the actual upper, just like a Pacific Northwest maker. No additional stitching in the underlayers of holding it together. And what's different is he does his roll welt the same way Whites does. So these are kilties obviously, but imagine these being the upper and the welt. So this is the upper, and this is the welt piece they sew on. So when we talk about a Norwegian welt, which most people will know, the pieces are stitched together like this, and then the upper is flared out like this to make what is essentially a stitch down with a piece tacked on, right? Norwegian rolled welt is the same thing, but this piece is installed upside down, stitched through, and then bent over these stitches so that you can't see them, and then flared out to stitch down, which is the way Whites does it. The difference between the two of these is a regular Norwegian, since it goes through the upper close to area where your toes are, doesn't need any filler in the bottom because all you're doing is filling the difference from the upper tucking under, right? So you don't need a big gap. But a roll welt will have something carved out to need a small gap filler, which is where the infamous white squeak comes from.
Obviously, I got to put a pin in this and discuss this afterwards. Number 2 is a Norwegian welt.
Yep.
And a Norwegian welt means that your upper is being stitched directly to the midsole, and it's just being folded in.
Correct.
And that's the end. You're not going to see it. When you look down, there's no leather on top of your midsole to be seen.
No. So this one does. It's just very hard to see. So you see here's where it's stitched in, and then you can see the fold and you can see the bottom. But if you look right here real close, you'll see that there's actually a little ledge on top that's a slightly different color than the piece under it. So that this one is folded down. And on the inside of this one, there's a liner so you can't feel it. But if I was to cut the liner at about this point right here where my hand is, you would see the stitches on the inside. So what's neat about this construction is well, besides the fact that it's a double or a stair welt with Norwegian, which is unique. But if this was just straight Norwegian, right? The upside to it is it operates just like a stitch down, a Pacific Northwest stitch down, but with a welt. And all they have to do is fill in the tiny little bit of space where the upper folds under, which would just be your squeak pad, right? Because there's no carving to be done. The stitches are closer to your toes. Now, in standard welt shown that you're going to see most commonly in the Indonesian realm, and like I said, I think this one is, because when I stick my fingers in here, it feels like there's a slight ledge on the sides. So I think this is standard. What'll happen is after this upper's flared out, like it's lasted, it's pulled down, they'll roll the uppers up against the nails. Like imagine this is upside down, it's nailed in, right? And they'll have some excess going in towards the center, and they'll roll that up for the welt. They'll whip stitch it around like we showed with like the Texas Tradition cowboy boot directly into the insole, and then pull that the rest of the way out so that you can't see it, and then do your traditional stitch down. That will leave the same kind of gap that you feel with a Norwegian rolled welt, which is what Whites fills with the squeak pad. And as anyone that's heard the infamous white squeak finds out, the cavity's just big enough that that squeak pad can move. And it moves enough, you get the squeak, right? And then to show that, here is the Norwegian roll welt, which as you can see, there are stitches going into the uppers. It's covered by this roll right here. And you also get this kind of like two-tieredness to it that's a little weird. It almost makes it kind of look like a double welt. And this is because of the skiving. So, as you can see here, like the two different stitches kind of sit on different layers. That's not like two different pieces of leather or something. That's just the skiving making one sit flatter than the other. And then that creates a cavity from what they cut in, and that's where the white squeak comes from. Is that pad in there starts to move, it just gets offset just enough because the cavity's just big enough that now you have leather on leather contact.
So the third one that we've kind of already discussed is the Norwegian rolled welt.
Yep.
And in that situation, just like the Norwegian we just said, it's being stitched into the midsole, so you do not have a separate welt. And then afterwards, it's getting folded back out so that it's sitting on top of the midsole and can be stitched down
Yep.
as well.
So the stitches
So
for the
that upper
Norwegian.
is stitched twice essentially.
Yep, and the
With no
reason
separate.
you don't see the stitches is because like where my thumb is in the example I'm showing, that's the stitches are being hidden or more realistically protected by that rolled piece down like this. That's why you don't see it. And it creates a pretty decent sized gap. Let me get you a picture here. Sean LeDuc. I don't know if you remember him, Sean LeDuc, Sons of Knives. He talks on the Frank's Boot community a lot. He actually took a pair of his whites apart and relasted them, took this elastic out. Let me grab that picture from him real quick, because he sent me a picture of his taken apart and asked a couple questions on how he thought what I should do to fix it. Yeah, right here. Okay. Discord, because this is a really good one actually.
So out of these three, two of the three are rolled outward, and the reason why the rolled outward is important or good is that it sloughs off water better. So that water, since you've got one piece of leather that's, you know, going from the top, it's going down, it's getting stitched, and then it's going back out. So you've got the same piece of leather going all the way. So there's literally nothing for that water to soak into or whatever. So it rolls off like a duck's back, and so it's more waterproof. So that's why it's been a popular construction.
This is the only one that really suffers from that problem. And it's not so much that the water doesn't like roll off. The biggest issue is because this is going directly into the upper and not into the footbed like with the Norwegian rolled welt. It has a path for water to get directly into the vamp of the boot. Because, like I said, if I cut the lining on the inside, you would be able to see these stitches on the inside. The Norwegian rolled welt actually crosses through a section of the footbed that you will not be able to see from the inside without cutting your footbed. So here,
the Norwegian, without it being rolled, is the odd duck here in that it folds inward and stays there.
I mean, the welt does fold out and allow water to run off, but the issue is there is a ledge on top for water to pool a little bit, and there is stitches in the upper. Those two are really the biggest issues. But from a not standing in deep water perspective, it's a sound construction. Standing in water perspective, you've got some problems coming down the road.
So we thought it was kind of important to have this video, partially to know what's available as your choices if you are going to order from an Indonesian builder, so that you know which one is best for you. But secondly, at least in my point of view, I don't think enough people realize that there's more than one kind of Norwegian welt.
Yes.
I think an awful lot of people think that once the word Norwegian is said, that's it, that they're all the same. There is no difference.
100%. And the Norwegian's based off stitch down. Like, it's literally replicating stitch down with a welt. Like, we talked about this in one of the other videos we recorded recently of heritage versus non-heritage. The whole idea of a Norwegian welt in dress shoes is to take a stitch down dress shoe and give it a replaceable welt, which is great for a casual pair of shoes. But for a pair of work boots, your uppers will be shot before it's time to replace that roll welt in most cases. It's just the reality of it. Here, up on the screen, I'm pulling over a picture. So this is when Sean was taking his whites apart and putting them back together. And you can open the screen on yours if you want. I have something circled on here. It's just a part that I told him to go ahead and cut out and skive because I felt like it would cause a bump in his arch. But as you can see, there's actually, even with this like Norwegian rolled welt style that's supposed to be stitched down with a welt, there's a fairly sizable cavity in here from the outside edge to the bottom. Like, and this is where all the stuff where you see black, by the way, is where he pulled the squeak pad out. that was glued down, but you could see that there's a decent sized cavity in here, even with the Norwegian rolled welt. That doesn't exist with standard Norwegian, because standard Norwegian is, once again, punching directly into the uppers, not into the footbed. So I figured that was kind of a cool picture. It let people see kind of the inside of what whites looks like. You can see that they do this cobbler style where they just cut this with a knife, run the awl through. There's no carving or any kind of traditional work being done. But yeah, I mean, like, it's funny because we talk about, like, you know, the cons of regular Norwegian welt, right? But here's one of the biggest cons of Norwegian roll welt that Norwegian solves. Yeah, Norwegian's not as waterproof, but Norwegian has the properties of stitch down where there is no fillers needed because there's nothing to fill. Whereas Norwegian roll welt, as everyone can see, clearly has a filler, or a necessary filler. It needs to be there, and that's where the, you know, quote unquote dreaded white squeak comes from. Is that squeak pad moving around in there. And you could see by the glue spots on that picture, which I've already taken down, but if you saw it back with there, like where the squeak pad was stuck is not uniform, meaning it didn't get uniformly glued everywhere. And that's a pair of Merriam natural horse rump, I think, bounty hunters is what those were. And still are. He just took this elastic toe out.
So as far as aesthetics goes, if you were buying a pair of Indonesians, it's whether you want to see that leather on that surface,
yep,
or not. Because if you go back far enough here, you could see the ledge where that leather isn't any longer. So that, what do you want to see? That, do you want to see the leather midsole when you look down at your boots, or do you want to see the leather, whatever color it is, when you're looking at the boots, when you're looking down on your boots? And that's of course the difference there.
Yep. Also, I think
I like it rolled out.
Yeah, I think you can do. No, sorry, I don't think. I know you can do Norwegian 360 all the way around. I don't know if you could do Norwegian rolled all the way around. I'm not sure. I've never seen it done. I'm seeing it somewhat.
I'm gonna find out. You better, because that's exactly what I want on my next build. I want a 360 rolled.
Yep.
I just think it would look badass. I think it would remove a lot of the nails. I think it would be more water resistant.
All the nails except for what's in the heel. You shouldn't need any nails at all.
I can't imagine a better build. The only problem, and well, there's two problems, and Mike thinks that both of these are in fact problems. One of the problems is that it's not traditional. It doesn't fit into the heritage that we were discussing in the previous video.
That's true.
And then the second one is that it can make it a little bit more chunky, especially depending on the builder. Because if you're doing a 360, then you've got to have a larger heel sticking out in order to stitch that down.
Yep.
And that's going to depend a little bit on the builder as to how good they are and how tight their stitching is. Because you could end up with a pretty big spur shelf, as some people call it, there. And I think that since these are all being hand welted and they're getting in there pretty tight with some smaller diameter stitches, I think it's going to get tight enough that it's not going to make that heel stick out anymore.
I think you're right on that. I think for the perspective of Indonesian, that'd be the case. I definitely would not do it with P&Ws. I know one of the P&Ws does it. I wouldn't be doing that because that's definitely a solid 3/8 of an inch.
No, I agree. Definitely would not. So yeah, there's a choice of the 360. There is what we consider the traditional heritage, which would be the 270.
Yep. Velt shown a lot of times, and I don't know what the historical reason for it is, but traditional velt shown, for whatever reason, is usually this 180 that you see here. I mean, from this side, it's 270, but the exterior stitch here, for whatever reason, is Velt shown traditionally is only this like 180 to 200-ish right here. What that reason is, I'm not really sure. But every pair of Indonesian Velt shown I have, the exterior stitch, which does not seem to go all the way through to the outsole, has always been that 180. So, I personally don't think it looks that bad, but, you know, I do also think that, like, matching the 270 would be cool, personally. Because I like the super tight double row aesthetic. Like, this does look, you know, fucking cool, to be entirely honest. Like, this high TPI double row on such a short ledge does look really fucking cool.
Do you think it's because of how often their Veld shown are half soles?
Possibility. Could 100% be just because it's half sole. I don't know if I've seen a Velt shown done in a full sole on any of the Indonesian pictures I've seen.
I don't have any examples near me, but we had the videos that still available that we pulled, that we had up in the previous of my blue ones and my two pairs of Rikers, where you can see that one of them was a 180 and one of them is a 270.
Well, this one is too.
And
so this one's a 180 lug, right? But it's actually 270 on the midsole on the inside that you can't see. And this is a whites. So even whites kind of does this at times for whatever reasons they choose.
Well, yeah, but in that situation, it's a 270 welt and it's a 180 stitch down.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's more than just the welt, because look, the 270 continues way into the midsole area past the end of the rolled welt. Now, why they would do that, I don't know, and it's not visible on the bottom, so it's clearly only done on the midsole layer. Why only that one would go so far back, I'm not sure. And it might also be because this is a lug. They chose not to stitch this, maybe? I don't know.
Is it the same on both sides? Maybe the machine got away from them and put a few more stitches in.
If you look, see, this one goes all the way to about right there. And on this side, it goes all the way to about right here. Yeah. I don't know. Might have just been a choice that they made at the time. Further. Yeah, I don't know.
Or is it perception, because maybe the heel is...
I mean, the heel
takes up more of the...
I mean, it's a larger heel, but it's not that much. I mean, no, it goes pretty deep. I mean, on this side, I could see it got away from him because, like, it goes all the way to right here. Now, on this side, it only goes to right here. So, I could see the getting away from them argument because it very clear. Because this one right here, there's actually a hole here. Oh, fuck, that's probably going to come across the camera. But looking at it in person, there's actually a hole here without a stitch going through it where the machine started to punch it, and then they didn't let the thread pass through. So...
Oh, yeah. You got the three types, and then you've got three different degrees as far as how much stitching as they go around. And I think technically you could pick any of the three degrees with any of the three welts. And it would either A, be a matter of your preference, or if you don't say anything at all, a matter of their preference.
Correct, yeah. Yeah. Only one is the traditional, like, or the Velt shown that's done like traditional stitch down. I don't think they can do that one 360. Which makes sense because besides Nick's, none of the P&W guys do it either. So I don't know if they would do that one 360.
Why? Why wouldn't they be able to?
Because
the P&Ws can't do it because they're using machines.
Well,
why wouldn't you be able to do it by hand?
Because something's got to be able to hold the last on the end, right? So you can't, if you flared the whole thing out, right? Something's got to still be attached to the last. Part of stitch down working is bringing that middle end to hold it onto the last so you can get the flared upper stitch down. If you flared it all out, the last could just fall out the bottom. I know Nick's has the 360 in that tactical style, and they do it by separating the heel counter as a separate piece. where there is some tucked under and the external heel counter covers flared out to make it happen, which I guess they could do exactly the same way. But there is, like, on that Nix Tactical, there is stuff tucked under.
There's going to be nails put in regardless during lasting.
Yeah, but they'll be removed.
Question is, how many of the nails are still going to be there when you're done? So you could have the nail hole, you could have nails going through into the welt, into the last in the back, and then stitch up the front, and then you could stop, pause, and then remove those nails from the back, and then keep on going.
Yeah, that might work. I just, usually there's something that's left there to keep the last in place. If you flared it all out, I don't know if it would work or not. Like I said, how Nix gets around it in that tactical one is what they do is that counter cover, you know, the like really square shaped one. Instead of tucking it under and nailing it like everybody else does, they flare it out so that that piece is the one that overlaps on what's out, so that what was left under is under and nailed, holding the last in place. That's how they pull that look off. Now, like I said, what you're talking about in trying to do it in that methodology, I mean, theoretically it could work. It's just, generally speaking, you would do 180 or 270 to avoid needing to bother with it at all, right? Now, that being said, you know, that could be a little bit of a lie, to be entirely honest. It might be possible to incorporate the midsole as part of the lasting and solve that problem, potentially. You could have the midsole in place as you nail it down and stretch over. That way, yeah, I mean, so that's possible if you flared out early in the lasting process, and as you're lasting and pulling, you pull it out, nail the midsole in place, flare it up, pull the nail out, nail it back down. I mean, I guess it's possible. I once again, if it's the Weltschone that operates like traditional stitch down, I would think that they might push back on that one a little bit. But the other three styles, 100%, no problem, could be 360. Whether they're traditional or not, there wouldn't be anything stopping you.
I'm not personally planning on using the Weltschone.
No.
Well, I've got a pair of dress boots that I'm going to have built.
Yeah.
Sooner than later. I keep on putting them off because I don't have to wear them very often, and since most of those times seem to be at funerals, I'm not looking forward to needing them. But I will do a Weltschone for the dress boots. Dress shoes, dress boots, shoes that cover my ankle. But on all the others, I'm going to do the Norwegian, and it's going to be the rolled welt. And unless I don't see what I like when I see it completed, I think I'm going to do Norwegian rolled 360 on all of my other builds.
I could see
assuming they'll let me.
Yeah, yeah.
I like the look of the rolled out leather.
Yeah. Well, and
small cavity.
In the couple he's done recently, it looks like Tahura, who's posted, I think 2, maybe 3 in the past month. It looks like he really thins the leather out real well to have a nice uniform look. So I don't know if he's got,
it could
like,
be too much
splitter.
It could be wrong.
I don't know. I thought this welt was too much, to be entirely honest, and it kind of is, but I fucking love every bit of it. And usually Norwegian, they don't take it all the way back to the full, or sorry, Norwegian they do. Usually double welt or stair welt, they don't take back all the way to the full 270, but obviously because of the Norwegian they had to on this. Because traditionally on, you know, double welt, it's the straight like 180, like more 180 than the other stuff we've seen, right? But like, I don't know. I think that welt's fucking awesome. I have 2 other pairs coming with this welt setup, so I think it's cool. It's chunky as fuck, but I think it's cool.
It looks really cool that it goes back further.
I don't think it's as elegant as this. I do think, because my other pair of Tahurvas in the black or Black Marion reverse waxed is this style of double welt, and I do think for double welt stair welt, like, this looks more elegant. But I also think that the Norwegian double welt.
Well, there's two factors there. One is that builder is doing a tighter stair.
Yeah.
And then the other is whether the stair goes around 180 or whether it goes around 270.
Yep. My
those aren't mutually exclusive.
Correct. In my other Tahura, the black pair, the stair is tighter and a little bit thinner. It's thick on those because the stairs look the same height on this one, even though they aren't. The reason they look the same height is because this stair right here has the Norwegian welt setting on top of it, which adds extra thickness that otherwise wouldn't be there. So that thickness is what makes them look like uniform stairs and kind of chunky.
So the difference would be whether you're, I guess, more concerned with how it looks from above, or whether you're more concerned with thinking about how it looks from below.
Correct.
I am rather OCD, and I guess I look at the things that can't always be seen. So I look at the ones that Mike just showed where the stair is going around 270, and I think, wow, that's more impressive. That looks better. There's more work going on in there. But then my brain thinks about where that half sole is ending. So if I were doing a full sole, I wouldn't hesitate. I would totally do that 270 stairwell. And if I was doing a leather sole, a completely leather sole, which is what I'm going to plan, which is what I'm planning on that dress boot that I mentioned. Again, I'm going to want 270. But on a half sole boot, my brain tells me that the things need to stop at the same point.
Yeah.
So since the half since the half sole ends at a 180, I want the stitch down to end at 180 as well, which would mean that the stair would have to end at 180.
Yep. Has a more elegant look to it. Not that,
and I'm still on the fence about this doing the stairwell. I'm not sure whether this should be part of this conversation or whether it should be in another one. But I'm still going back and forth on this stair. Some of those stairs look, we've used the word chunky to describe it.
Yeah.
They look kind of big and a little overdone, a little, well, chunky. No other word, so that's the word we've been using. But, some of them, that pair of Renavs that he showed a picture of there, some of them are tighter.
Yep.
Some of them, the stairs look more refined.
Yep. A little more elegant.
I mean, it's definitely badass. Doing a stair is definitely badass. But sometimes just because you can
doesn't mean you should. Yeah.
And so that's the internal, I guess, battle that I'm having presently. And another example of that, just because you can doesn't mean you should, is, and I guess it's related to this, is doing a chain stitch or a braided welt instead of a normal stitch down or a normal welt. And you have one example. Is it braided or is it
braided Norwegian and saddle stitch down? So what Jeff's talking about here is, if you look at the side here, you can see the gold is in what's called the chain link pattern, where it's 3 threads that make that pattern, and only one's actually passing through the upper. It's decorative and it's kind of traditional in terms of like a Norwegian welt. And it's this top welt right here, and it's a chain. So there's 3 threads there. And then what Jeff's
Well,
talking...
no, that's actually the difference that I was trying to point out.
Yep.
If it's 3 pieces of thread, then it's braided. If it's 2 pieces of thread, then it's chain.
Yep.
That's the difference that I'm trying to point out. And I can't tell, I can't focus well enough on your pick.
Yeah, Renav Tura uses 3. He's got pictures of it on his Instagram. He uses 3 threads. He calls it chain, but it is technically braided, yes. And then I go into a traditional saddle stitch down, which you could also do in that chain or braid as well, which is traditional for Norwegian.
So I can't say that I'm a fan of a chain using, I guess, what I would think is the true definition, or maybe I'm just using Jeff's definition. But there is more to that. And when you watch, I've watched different videos and I've talked to different builders. The chain is 2 pieces of thread.
Yeah,
You've got one that's real, and then you've got another one that's
crisscrossing,
snaking in and out.
Yep.
So you just, when you're looking at it from the outside, it's a chain. I mean, you look at a chain and it's 2 things, and then it crosses over and it's 2 things.
Yep. Yep. It looks like a chain link of a towing chain. That's what we mean by the chain links. And when we talk about braid, what's happening is you have one that's looping like this, and so they'll loop over, pass through, and then you'll take 2 separate threads, cross them like this, and they'll pull it over again, pull it tight through. It's only this piece that's actually connecting it to the top. These 2 are decorative, but they're looping around each other. And that's important because the reason they call it chain versus braided is braid can technically be 3 colors. A chain can obviously only be 2. That's obviously all done in 1 color. The other thing is the chain's a bit of optical illusion. That one piece, what they do is at the very end of the chain, they take 1 single thread, pull it equidistant like you're doing your shoes, wrap, pass through into the shoe once or twice to create a solid chain to hold it in place. And then when they pass it out to go into the next one is when they start crossing the streams like Ghostbusters, but it's 1 thread. Now, that's complicated because if you screw up the length of that 1 thread, guess who gets to do it all over again? There's no adding extra length in back at that point. That's why most people opt for the braid method, is because you don't have to worry about getting your sizing 100% perfect, or just throwing a bunch of thread in the void to make sure you have enough, because you do have to start with a perfect middle point.
Oh, I've been dying for a braided welt forever, and I haven't been able, ever since I discovered it was possible. And I haven't been able to get anybody to do it. I have tried very hard, but I haven't been able to get anybody to do it. So now I'm in a situation where I can. I'm not sure I want to, and I think the reason purely has to do with the diameter of the thread and the TPI that's being used. So I'm going to try to find, I've got an example on my phone here that I can show you guys. But there's a certain cleanness to be able to look down at your feet, look down on the boots, and to see the TPI, to see the thread and where it disappears, and how tight it is. And if you're using, whether it's a braided or whether it's a chain, either one, you are creating a situation where you don't have that space showing up between, that's bringing it to your attention how tight the TPI is.
100%.
It looks like a non-stop piece of thread.
Yep. And they have to do that because if they made the TPI the same, there'd be nowhere for the threads to pass through. Like there'd be no gap. It would just look like lumps at
But
that point.
they do have to reduce the TPI to
Yep.
do that. But even then, their TPI is still so high that you're not seeing
You're not seeing the
the
braid.
texture
Yeah,
of the braid.
yeah. It looks
You,
like
you
lumps.
can't tell that it's a braid.
Yeah, yeah. It looks like
It
lumps.
just looks like a.
I don't want to call it spaghetti because it's more organized than spaghetti, but it looks like lumps.
Let's hope I might be able to find this faster. I've got some pics on here done by. I can't remember the guy's name right now. I'm not sure I could pronounce it either, but he's a German guy. And he does the lower TPI and he uses super thick thread. And it creates something that just looks incredible to me. Of course, I can't find it. Figures, right?
That's how it happens.
So, all right, talk, Mike. I apparently can't do two things at once.
Yeah. I mean, it's just one of those realities. I was trying to see if I could find it too, because I'm pretty sure you sent it to me before as well. But man, there's a
there it is
in there. Yeah,
there it is. It's in the Discord. It's not. It is three threads, but it's only two colors.
Yeah, it's on the screen now.
So that looks badass to me, you know, but because that thread is so thick.
Well, and he's
that you
doing
can actually
like 2
see
stitches per inch too to pull that off as well. Maybe 2.5.
But for the Norwegians, you'd have to ask them to really change up what they're doing to create a much lower TPI and to use much thicker thread that they don't have. Special order in some super thick thread for you. And I think it's, even though they seem to be willing to do just about anything that the customer wants, I think that's reaching the limit.
Yeah.
I think that's the point where they say, no, we're not going to do that.
Yeah, the other thing
You're
too
crazy.
is when you have really high TPI available, it's kind of sacrilegious to be like, yeah, I could get this really awesome 9 to 10 TPI, which is super desirable and is only seen in bespoke dress shoes that get up to 13. Could you do 2.5 instead? Yeah.
Yeah. Thought I just saw a photo that was showing it being done. You have that photo? You had one too.
Yeah, I have yeah. I've got the Tahura video. I could put it up on screen real quick where he's got it pinned to the top of his Instagram. Let me get it open here. Pause the screen for a second to get it up.
There's one. There's one you can put up. But your video was real good too.
Yeah, I'm just gonna get it up real quick. It'll be on the screen here in just a second. Here we go. For everyone to see, this is where they pass it through. Now he's
actually
doing,
this one that I
doing,
just posted up is actually using 5 threads.
Yeah, as long as it's an odd number, it should always work. So they're seeing the video right now of a bay from Tahura doing it and showing off exactly what we're talking about.
So for me, what I'm saying, sometimes just because you can doesn't mean you should. With the high TPI being available and being possible, which isn't always possible. When you're having machine do it, you can't. I mean, it's only an option to get that high a TPI when it's being done by hand. So when you can get that high a TPI, to be screwing it up, to be messing it up, to be hiding it by doing the chain or the braid doesn't make sense. I don't think. I don't think I'm going to do it.
I would agree with that. I mean, you're essentially taking away one of the benefits of going that route. That'd be like saying, I want that Lamborghini, but God, that governor's got to be at 61 miles an hour.
It's still tough. Because that other photo, that first photo that I put up for you guys there, that with that thick thread, that braid can be seen.
Yeah.
You know that it's a braid. You know that something is going on there. It's very clear that it's going on. It's very clear that it's something special. But with the much thinner thread and the higher TPI, it's not clear what's going on.
No. I mean,
it just looks like a jumble that's hiding that TPI that you should be.
Yeah. Let's see. Let me put some light on it and see.
And make clear.
Yeah, let me put some light on this. Because this might make sense with a little bit more light. But if you look here. Ooh, too bright. There we go. With that, you can kind of see that. There you go. You can see the braid a lot more now than you probably could see earlier with the extra light. But it's tight enough that you're not going to see that from a distance. Like, is it the 9 to 11 that the rest of it is? No. Like, you could tell when I do this, like right there, you could tell that the stitch down below it is definitely much tighter in terms. But, like, right here, like, you can see that, like, it's a very tight Norwegian. And it's definitely not something that's super easy to see without, like, having your face right on top of it.
Those boots are actually 3.
Yes.
3 stitch downs. 3.
Yeah. That's actual braid. Term. It's 3 threads.
3 rows.
Yeah. So
he's got 1 row that's the welt.
Yep.
And he's got a second row that's the stitch down.
Yep.
For the sole.
Yeah, it's for the
outsole.
Yeah. So.
And then he's got a third one.
Yep.
And that third one is going into the vamp, which technically is making the boot a lot less waterproof. Maybe a lot isn't.
Because of this top one, it definitely is.
Because water could get in there. It is piercing the outside of the vamp.
Yep.
But it looks really cool.
It does. It's also shinky horse rump, so I'm not going to be jumping into puddles in this. Shit's too expensive for that. So, but yeah, like I said, and you know, you could do that kind of chain on the lower layers, but you know, as you could just see by looking at it, the TPI goes down a lot just for this type of chain. Like, it's a significant reduction. So you can kind of see the chain a little bit better. As you can see, like, this isn't even that far away from the camera, and it's getting very difficult to tell that's a chain. And this is 18 inches at best. So
if it were me, and I was thinking this when he first showed it to me, if I was doing one of them braided, I'd want to do all of them braided. Like, you did 1 braided and then 2 of them normal rows.
Yep. But you know.
There we go. Well, how do you? I guess it's because you don't have the OCD.
No, I didn't specify on the Norwegian. I only specified that I wanted the color gold because I thought it looked good in that setup. And then when he asked me if I wanted the chain, I was like, yeah, sure, why not? And that's what I went with. Like I said, from above cannot see the chain, so there's no OCD. From above, I just see what is regular stitch down, so I'm fine with it. But if I had done the chains going down, the already slightly chonky stairs would be way chonkier, because Tahura doesn't quite get as close as Renov does, and they're already a little chonky, but that braid would have made them even chonkier than they already are. And that boot's already chonky enough, so I think it turned out pretty perfect the way it is. But yes, I could have had them do Norwegian just as a simple saddle stitch, just like on the bottom, and have no chain at all. And maintain that same, high level of TPI.
I'd have had all 3 of them the same. Whether all 3 of them were, whether all 3 of them weren't.
Yeah, but like I said, I can't see the Norwegian from above, So it doesn't
Yeah,
bother
but
me.
you see them when you're looking at your boots. You see them when you're showing your boots to others.
I mean, once again, I only care about how I see them from above, because that's what the most of what I'm seeing is looking down at them.
It just occurred to me I could show them the that one that I showed you the other day where it was two. The guy was using thick thread and he did 2 rows of braided right next to each other.
Oh yeah, yeah, the one where he went into the heel with or the heel counter area with no welt too.
Or where did
I can try to see if I can find it. I think I remember which one you're talking about. Because that's the one that with the guy that was doing the real big loops.
Yeah, it looks really cool. Download. Make all these categories on my phone so it's quick and easy to see shit. But then I've got too many different categories to go through. Can't find it. Must have deleted it after I shared it with you.
I found it. Found her. It's still a messenger.
That's what I was about to do, is go into Messenger and save it all over again.
Discord.
So the video that he's about to show, well, the picture he's about to show you, it came from a YouTube video that I was watching.
All right, double check that those are. I got all of them in chat.
No, that's not.
Oh, that's not the ones.
No, it was the same conversation, but there was one where he was using a guy was using super thick thread. Here it is.
Is that the one where he showed like the 4 examples? Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. It's the one that was slightly higher than that. Yeah, it's the one with the yellow leather.
Well, off-white, not colored at all.
I think the leather is yellow.
There's one of them. There's the other one.
Yeah, yeah, it's the yellow leather. Yep, that's the one.
It's up in Discord. Oh, you meant the yellow boot, and I'm thinking thread.
Yeah, yeah.
All
No,
right.
no, the thread's definitely white. Yeah, the yellow leather. Yeah, where he did like the double chain next to each other.
That's an example that's reinforcing what I was saying before, that it's a matter of having to do lower TPI and much thicker thread for it to be seen. Because when you look at that one, it's clear what's going on.
Yeah.
But that thread is super,
Yeah, it's
super
huge.
thick.
And he's also doing 2 next to each other to accentuate it more.
And he did the 2 next to each other in a way where there's no separation in them. So that's a really cool look.
Yeah.
But I don't know what you'd have to do to get that. What builder you'd have to use to get that.
I have no idea on that one.
I don't think anybody in Indonesia is going to do it. Maybe they would. I mean, you could certainly ask whichever one you decide that you want to
Yeah, send them the
trust
video.
and which one you want to go with.
Yeah, with the video,
They'd
they
be
might be able
willing
to
to
pull
do
it
it.
off. Who knows?
They could certainly do it. It'd be a matter of whether they were willing to do it. Whether that's a look that they wanted any of their boots to show.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. You definitely need the right upper to go with that. That seems like the kind of welt that would go real well with like a dress shoe medallion, especially like a fleur de lore or something like that.
That's not a braided one. That's a chain. That's 2 chains next to each other. I don't know if they're braids, if they would look better, or if they'd look a little jumbled.
That close together, they'd probably look a little jumbled because the point of the braids is to add a little gap in between them. so that the braid sticks out a little bit more. And since those are so tight together, I think it would just make it bigger in general.
Did you show them that brown one that you popped up in Discord that we were just talking about?
Yeah, here we go. Yeah, it's up there now.
That makes it extremely clear what is meant by chain. So in that one, there's 2 threads being used.
Yep. But this one is being used with a slight gap too. As compared to the yellow leather where they are omitting the gap, which is just how tight they're keeping the internal thread. Like, obviously, if they want to make it closer, they can make it closer. There's nothing stopping them. And then here's example of one doing it with a heel rand on a black engineer.
I didn't like that.
I didn't either.
I don't know if I showed you more photos or not, but this guy used a separate
colored heel, yeah.
Piece of leather, and you can't call it a welt, but
it's really a heel rand. Like it's stitching in a heel rand essentially. Because that's what he's doing, is he's making it
extra piece of leather is just being attached to the outside by the welt. And as a barrier, and I don't think it looks good. It's creating a storm welt.
Yeah, to match up with the regular storm welt. Yeah, I'm gonna grab another one of the pictures and show the final work so that they can see what's happening.
It's creating a storm welt, which I guess is cool, but
a 360
you can't stain
storm
that
welt specifically. Yeah.
Can't stain that. It's got to stay that color.
Yep. Well, and
you know, and maybe if he was thinking ahead, he could have stained it before putting any thread through.
Well, and he also would have had to do it with the rest of it, because if you look at the rest of the boot, it's the same thing where he has did a natural all throughout. Like, he could have stained the entire welt, because the whole welt is natural across the fact. It's just this heel rand piece has been added to make it look like a 360 welt, even though you can clearly see the join, and it's not 360. It's still 270.
Yeah, that wasn't very clean at all. I was shocked that he didn't do that cleaner than that.
No. Well, both of them, the actual welt and the fake welt that he made, essentially the Norwegian welted heel rand, like both of them, you can clearly see the join, but it's on the inside. It's just one of those things that.
We didn't see it, but it's on the outside too. That was actually another thing about this video that confused me, because he could have taken one thick piece of leather
and just did the whole thing,
and taking it all the way around, but he didn't choose to do that. He chose to take one piece of leather like this long, and one piece
this long,
that long, and so one of them is like 270 and the other one is like 90.
Yeah, the remaining 90.
And so he's got that joint on both sides.
No,
I couldn't understand why he'd do that.
I don't either, because you could just have done one piece at that point.
Anywho, did we miss anything that you can think of?
No,
I guess we're just starting to ramble and have our own little conversation here of likes and dislikes. But it is showing in a roundabout way that there are a bunch of different choices that can be had, and you can either be informed or knowledgeable enough to know what all of those choices are, so that you end up with what you think looks best or functions best for you. Or if you don't know it, that's fine. They're gonna make an assumption based on what they feel like doing or what they think is going to look best, and hope you agree.
Yep. Which chances are will probably be. I haven't seen anything so far except for the last thing we shown that is criminally displeasing. The last thing we showed was criminally displeasing. Like, I don't know what that is. Not good is the answer, but for the most part, they're not going to give you something super duper ugly. So this depends on like your level of pickiness when it comes down to it, right?
I forget where that particular builder was. I want to say he was operating out of China. Not quite Indonesia, but Indonesia adjacent.
Yeah, once again, the whole point of that build that is just kind of jarring is there's no reason he couldn't just did 360. Like, why do 2 extra joins for no reason? You're already welting it through the uppers, so what's the big deal?
He was already doing it by hand.
Yeah,
so.
I mean, the only thing I could think of is like maybe the glue hadn't set, and he only pulled it, like maybe it was a split last that breaks into 2 parts, and he took the heel part out, did it first, and then did the rest. But like you could see in the other picture I showed that it was already completely lasted and glue set, so there was no reason to do that. Oh well.
So you got 3. You got 3 welt choices. I don't know of any more that any of the Indonesians offer other than those 3.
Not
sure what else you could want.
You got hand welt, shown, Norwegian roll welt, Norwegian, and stair welt. Those are, I think, the main 5.
Well, that's what I wanted to go. Yeah. That's what I wanted to go back to. Now that we've fleshed everything out of what everything is, I'm surprised that Tahura is not, in fact, doing a Veldshone construction. He's calling it that, but he's doing a stitch down.
Yeah.
Why?
Probably because there's no real reason to do it the other way. The other way of doing it is essentially just a kind of ghetto-ish hand welt, so why not just do a real stitch down?
I would think that stitch down construction was lesser than Veldshone.
From an aesthetics perspective, yes. I mean, you know, Veldshone is really meant to be a work shoe. He's just taking it from a work shoe. I mean, Renov does the same thing. They're just taking it from a work shoe perspective, right? Like why does Franks and Nicks and Whites do it? The traditional machine stitch down? Simple. It's cheap, it's effective, it's durable, and it's more waterproof than most of the other constructions. From their perspective, Veldshone is still a work shoe welt technically, even though these days it has a lot of commonality with a nice looking dress welt.
I think you've got that reversed.
Well, I mean, field shoe in its name implies that it's a work shoe already.
I think stitch down would be more of a work boot, and Veldshone would be more of a casual or dress.
Correct, but it's not meant to be. Like, it was originally meant to be a work boot, whereas like a hand welt would be more casual or dress, right? It's like when the Indonesians initially...
Veldshone is hand welt. How are you defining hand welt?
Hand welt is with an actual welt, not with an actual upper. So it's whip stitched is what it is. It's not hand welt. It's whip stitched.
I would call a hand welt anything you're doing by hand instead of a machine.
Hand welt implies that you are hand stitching an actual hand welt, which is a piece of leather with a 22-degree angle cut into it to an upper. Is hand welt. Hand welt is a separate piece of leather that's not generally the same color. Whereas Veldshone in the field shoe style is hand welting, but not using an actual welt. It's whip stitching, which is what we call in like cowboy boots, where the upper is stitched to the midsole and then it's flared out. But there's no actual welt being created there. It's just reusing the excess leather as a welt.
Okay.
So, like, if you think about it from this perspective here, like...
I understand what you're saying. Yep. I understand what you're saying, but you are You are defining hand welt as an actual type of construction without actually telling me exactly what type that is that differentiates it.
Well,
Whereas I
it's in the
feel that
part you can't
hand weld
see.
has to do with whether it's done by hand or a machine.
Yeah, well, it's the part you can't see.
You could have a hand welted Goodyear. You could have a hand welted
Well, Goodyear
Norwegian.
welt is a
You could have a
machine.
hand welted Belgian.
Yeah, yeah. Goodyear welt is a machine, but like if you look right here,
No, no, no,
it,
no. You keep
it,
on saying that, but
yeah,
that's not true.
well, it's a Goodyear welt
Goodyear
machine.
is a construction that can be done by a
So
machine,
you see the
and
gap.
Goodyear is often done by a machine, especially for speed.
Yep. But
But Goodyear can certainly be done by hand.
do you see the gap that exists here in the edge? See how the upper doesn't perfectly tuck under? Like there's an actual gap there. That is caused by that Veltshon process. So when you pass that piece of leather under and it is whip stitched together like this, right? So it's whip stitched under to the midsole, and then this piece right here is flared out. It creates a gap, and you see that slight gap that exists in there. Whereas traditional stitch down wouldn't have that gap. It would just fold down like this because it doesn't have this extra force from the stitching going in there and creating this, well, I'm going to call it a C channel for lack of better words, but it's a C channel essentially that exists from it, right? That you won't get from traditional stitch down. In that process, you are not carving anything in the bottom. You're not doing anything with the holdfast. You're just driving the awl through it. That's all you're doing. That's why it's called whip stitching. So a Goodyear welt, or the Goodyear welting process, there is no welting happening. There's a gemming that is glued to the insole. There's no holdfast, no channel, no process created. You're gluing it. No,
gemming is a physical welt.
No, the gemming is a piece of cloth on the footbed that you're passing the thread through that's going to the welt. It's on the inside. You're not carving anything. You're not lining anything up. You're not doing any extra work. You're gluing literally a piece of fabric with a little plastic running it through, driving the awl through and pulling it against the welt to the upper to the gemming in that process. That's what Goodyear welting is. It's a 3-piece process. Traditional hand welting is literally just insole that's been carved and has gaps into upper into welt. Also, when you're hand welting something,
what you're describing would be a Norwegian. It would be a Norwegian hand welt where somebody just decided to put an extra piece of material between the process.
No,
and that's not what's going on. The separate this separate piece that is what makes which is part of the definition of a Goodyear welt. You've got the midsole going into this piece, and you've got the uppers going into this piece, so that this piece here is what holds everything together, so that if you needed to do a complete rebuild because this stitching wore out, and you'd remove this piece completely, grab a new one, and then stitch through one side of it and stitch this into the other side of it. You got 2 stitching going into that. You don't have one piece of stitching going straight through everything.
You do in
that would be Norwegian. And it would be unnecessary to have this piece.
You do in hand welting. So the difference between the Goodyear welting process and hand welting is twofold. 1, the gemming and artificial layers exist. Number 2, a Goodyear welting machine does a simple stitch. It does not do a saddle stitch. It's a traditional chain stitch. So you cut one, I can pull the whole welt off. No hand welt will you ever be able to do that with, because it's saddle stitch. It's lock stitched. That's a complete difference in the process, not to mention everything that's done to the footbed to make it possible. The Norwegian rolled welt, which we consider stitch down, technically is just a weird hand welt, because it's not actually passing through the uppers in the way a true Norwegian welt is. A Norwegian welt doesn't touch the footbed at all. A true Norwegian is straight vamp upper to welt. no footbed process involved. The Norwegian hand welt's really actually just an actual weird hand welt process where we're, instead of passing it through in one and pulling it flat this way, which is what you do. So like when you flip it upside down, you welt them together, you pull this flat, that's what makes a hand welt, right? And it's got an angle cut into it to help flatten that piece out as it's passing through. The Norwegian rolled welt is taking a play on that process, flipping the welt upside down, passing it through the footbed with no carved channel, which in Tahura's case, he'll probably carve a channel because he's doing it by hand, but White's just cuts it with a knife and then rolls over the top of it to create the roll, because they're not tucking it all the way under. The reason it's called Norwegian is they're not tucking it under the uppers. But it's really an actual hand welting process that's more related to hand welting, because not only are they saddle stitching it, they're also passing it through the footbed, which they could use a gimming and make it a Goodyear welt style process, but they're pulling over the top of it. The only reason that we call it stitch down Norwegian is because White's is a stitch down company. A Norwegian roll welt really has nothing to do with stitch down. It's really a hand welting process at the end of the day. The difference is it's not being done under the uppers where it's hidden. It's being done much higher up where the roll is visible.
It's both. But stitch down means that you're stitching something down. In this case, you're stitching down the vamp. If it's a 270, it's, I mean, I guess if we're doing a 360, it'd be the vamp and the counter. But you're stitching down a vamp. Now, if you're doing a stitch down boot, that's all you're doing. You're bringing it out there and you're stitching everything down. It's stitched down. It's a stitch down. When you're doing a Norwegian rolled welt, you're bringing it in, you're stitching it to the midsole, and then you're flipping it out so that it can be stitched down as well. It's two different things going on at once.
You don't have to. That's what I'm saying is like, so like if you look at the picture I sent you of the White's cuts the upper that's supposed to flare out. Like if you look there, that is all the extra piece. There's no upper being flared out in the way they're doing the process. They're just cutting it straight across it, right? So like when we talk about it, the idea is with the stair is after you stitch it all the way out, you would flare both the piece you've stitched on, which is the welt, and what's left of the upper would be flared out, right? But if you look at Sean's picture, they just straight up cut that shit flat. It is a hand welt at that point. There's nothing stitched down about it because there's no upper being flared to the outside. It's literally just a hand welt where they have not tucked it all the way under. That's the only thing even remotely stitched down about it. It's not even stitched down at all. It's just hand welting. Now, if you flared the upper out with it and you had that, you'd have an even bigger step. But say you flared it out and did that, you could call it stitch down. But there's nothing in the uppers that's being passed through the actual outsole stitch. It's all that extra piece.
Maybe Sean's boot wasn't a Norwegian rolled welt. Maybe Sean's boot was a stitch down.
No, it was a Norwegian rolled welt. Because he wouldn't have carved the channel on the
If it was, then it had to be stitched down to the midsole.
That's
the connection.
It's all the rolled piece.
That's why there's no physical separate welt.
No, there is a physical separate welt. That's what I'm saying. The Norwegian roll welt has a physical separate welt. They sew on an extra piece of leather. That roll is not there naturally. They take a matching piece of leather that goes around and they sew it on there. It's a separate piece. So like the zucchini you have is a second piece. What they do is they take the upper, right? So this is the upper. It's been lasted over and it's got nails in it, right? And they take a actual separate piece of leather, put it on upside down like this, stitch it through as they remove the nails out. And then when they roll it down like this, what they would traditionally do is this piece is rolled and it's covering your stitches, right? Like that. Now they would also take this upper piece right here and roll it under too, so that you have this, and that would make it stitch down. But if you look in the boot, they've straight up cut this piece off, and it's that. They've trimmed these two flat and just folded it down. It's just a hand welt at that point. There's no stitch down because none of this upper piece that's left is getting fluted under. They're not like stitching it in like this and then fluting the excess out. They're stitching a secondary piece on there that's the same matching leather. There's two pieces of leather going on here in the Norwegian rolled welt. Because he had to actually get he had to get a second piece of leather to do it. I mean, you can see it. I think Frank's had a picture of it up. Even when Frank's do it, they use a separate piece of leather in the Norwegian roll welt.
There's a... I sent you a photo.
Okay. Messenger?
Discord.
Discord. All right, hold on. Let me get the bottom. Hit send on it a second time. There it goes. Yeah, there's two pieces of leather there. So if you look, you see the piece that's upside down, that's a secondary piece of leather that they're stitching on. And then what they'll do is they'll trim and flare that upper out once all the lasting is done. That's done with two pieces of leather. So they're adding an extra welt in that process. And that's the whole premise of White's pushing the Norwegian hand welt, is that you could replace that secondary piece if your stitches got too close. No muss, no fuss. But your uppers would be shot by that point. That's what I'm saying. The Norwegian rolled welt is just a hand welt that isn't tucked under the uppers. That's the only thing making it Norwegian, is the stitches are visible from, you know, the outside of the boot versus being tucked entirely under.
What's it doing? What's the point in it?
That way that welt piece can be replaced.
The thread is going through the midsole, and it's going through the upper, and it's going through the liner, but whatever. It doesn't really matter.
Yep.
It's going through the midsole, and it's going through the a vamp.
Yep, the vamp, liner,
and
midsole.
If it's going through both of those things and being anchored together, what is that extra piece of leather doing?
It's a piece that can be replaced. Because that extra piece of leather.
The thread is going through both pieces regardless.
Yeah, but so that piece of leather you see that you're looking at the rough outside of, that's what's going to get stitched down, like the actual outsole stitched to your midsole and outsole. So once all of that's stitched around, you have that extra welt piece, and they fold it down, they will trim off all the internal down to almost flat, and that will now be the welt that gets outsole stitched. So like technically every hand welt is stitched down, and the fact that like how it's outsole stitched to the midsole and everything, that's still all done in the stitch down process. But in that rolled welt, there's no actual upper being flared out at all. It's that secondary piece of leather that they're stitching on. The difference is between a hand welt and a Norwegian rolled welt is a hand welt, it would be done under the boot where you can't see it.
I don't understand.
I
understand.
It's how far out they're doing it.
I understand what you're saying. I don't understand why, and I don't agree with your... That piece of leather that we're looking at in that photo is thin as fuck.
Yeah. Well, they have to be able to roll it over.
That is not the same thickness as the vamp.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
All right. Well, that fucking leather, same boot. That leather there is thick as fuck. Yeah. That is the fucking vamp.
Yeah. Yeah.
You just told me it doesn't get flipped out.
Yeah. Well,
you just told me it stays underneath.
That's why I said Frank's, as I said, flipped it out. White's does not. White's trims that all the way down to the base. You can see it in Sean's picture. Mine are all the same.
That photo that we're looking at is the same boot as this one. So what is that extra little green piece? What is it fucking doing?
The green piece. It's so look at the front of your boot where it's separating a little bit. Look at the tip of it. That is that top green piece. That's that green piece delaminating from the rest of it. It's sitting on top. Frank's just put it over across the top and stitched it down. The whole point of the reason White's does it is that piece can be replaced. Why Frank's did it that way, I don't know, because that piece can't be replaced now. Like, the whole point of the roll welt is to be able to replace that leather. And in that, you couldn't do it. Like, you're right. In that one, replacing the roll welt wouldn't do anything. It would do literally zero. Yeah, it's literally sitting on top. In that boot you're holding right there, it is literally doing nothing. It just put extra holes in the upper. But like when on a pair of whites, they trim that down. They don't bring both of them out. They trim the excess of the upper piece out so that it's just the rolled welt being stitched down to the midsole. I mean, it doesn't remove the holes from the upper, obviously. Like, you're still putting holes in the upper, but at least the welt is acting like an actual welt. Now, why they used a piece so thin at Frank's, I don't know. I haven't had them do any of the Norwegian hand welt stuff.
So, on this boot, assuming you're right, because I think you're right, I guess you're right, but assuming you're right, then that means that they folded out the vamp because there is a thick piece of leather there.
Yeah, no, that
There's
one, the vamp is folded out.
a thick piece of leather there.
Yeah.
So they have folded out the vamp.
Yep.
And then there's a little piece of leather sitting on top. Why the fuck? Why is it sitting on top, and why is it being used in that photograph during construction?
Because they're replicating Norwegian hand welt. So in Norwegian hand welt, the piece that's folded out that you see there would be trimmed down to the base and not be present. You wouldn't flip them both out. So whatever piece you stitched on would be your welt at that point, and you would trim the excess down. Now, why Frank's did it that way, I can't tell you. That's not how you would normally do Norwegian roll welt. Like, if you take a look at this boot right here, like, you can see mine is significantly thinner. Like, it's clearly just the roll welt. You also see what you also don't see? You don't see the join on my toe cap either. Mine is just the welt. Nothing else. Where I can clearly see the join of the toe cap on yours. If you look at the side where the toe cap's at, you can see the join of the toe cap, no problem. Like, mine is just a welt piece.
So, are you saying that White's does not use that extra piece of leather?
Mm-mm. They put the extra piece of leather on, and then where you see your uppers would be flared out, they trim that down flat. So, like, if you look at Sean's picture, you can see, if you look at the edge of the picture, I'm going to bring it up on screen so everyone can see it. If you look at the edge of the picture, you can see right where the upper has been trimmed, because it's a slightly different color from where it flares out. It's like an orange color. So you can see right here where White's has trimmed it flush with the midsole, and it's just the uppers being rolled out. If you look at the right side of that picture, Jeff, you can see like that kind of orange color sticking through that's between the welt piece and the uppers. That's where they've trimmed the uppers to the top of the midsole.
Every discussion that I have had and every picture I have looked at and every definition that I have read on every web page that I can find says that the characteristic of a Norwegian welt, whether it's rolled or not, is that it does not need a separate welt piece, that it literally does not have an actual, by definition, welt. Now, like I said before, we do use the word welt in two different ways. We use it to describe the construction of how the midsole is attached to the upper. And we also use it specifically to describe a separate piece that gets
Yep. Stitched to. Yep.
yeah,
Yep.
it gets stitched on by two different sides, by two different things that get joined by that welt. If a Norwegian does not have a physical welt, then what the fuck is that piece of leather?
Well, it's stitched down has a physical welt. Norwegian, like this style, most regular Norwegian welts have a physical welt. They just pass through the walls of the upper. That's what I'm saying. They call it the Norwegian roll welt stitch down methodology. There's nothing stitched down about it. It's just a Norwegian roll welt. It's a hand welting method. There's nothing stitched down about Norwegian roll welt. It's just this is why I struggle with the whites marketing and why I just dismiss it, because there's nothing stitched down about it. It's a hand welt. It's literally a hand welt. It's got a carved piece in the uppers. It's using a piece for the welt. They're not folding the uppers out because it would make it too thick. And the whole point of folding the uppers out at that point, why would you poke holes in the uppers? It makes no fucking sense. You've already taken away the waterproofness by poking holes in the uppers. If you're just going to flare the uppers out, don't bother poking holes in it in the first place.
Because if all you do is fold it outward, if all you do is take the vamp, fold it outward, then you have only connected the two on the outside. You've only connected it by that stitch down. You haven't actually connected it to the midsole on the inside.
Correct. Yeah, it's only held in place by the actual glue that's holding the liner to the footbed. Yeah, that's how stitch down works. But that's what I'm saying is
which is the reason for using the McKay lock stitch.
Yep.
With the McKay lock stitch, with the McKay lock stitch, you're holding everything down internally, and then you're folding it out and stitching down to stitch down the midsole to the outsole. So that is the stitch down. The stitch down is connecting the outsole.
Yep.
Plus glue.
Yep. But you don't have to McKay lock stitch down. It could be done without it. They're not mutually inclusive. Like, you can create it without it. This method right here of the Norwegian rolled welt, its purpose, right, is to be able to replace this piece of leather once you have sanded it too close after resoles. That's the only reason you would do this methodology, right, from a functional perspective. But if you're going to fold the uppers down under it, you're just doing stitch down with another layer on it, and you gain none of those benefits. So all you've done is poke holes in your upper for no reason. Like you've lost every benefit of it. Like, the reason Whites does this without folding that piece over is so that when you've sanded this down to one row layer, all they got to do is stitch a new welt on, and bam, you have a 2-row again. No muss, no fuss, if your uppers aren't completely shot.
One of the ways connects the midsole and the insole. With the Norwegian, you're folding it inward, and you're stitching down the vamp, liner, and the midsole and the insole. You're connecting everything together. Then after you do it, you're flipping it out so that you've got that water resistance thing going on. And after you fold it out, then you stitch it down to both the midsole and the outsole. But you're not connecting it to the insole that time. So you've got two different things going on with the Norwegian. You've got sewing everything together on the inside, and then you've got connecting the outsole basically on the outside. And when you do a stitch down, as we call it, all you're doing is stitching down the midsole and the outsole. You're not stitching down the insole. And that's when the McKay lock stitch comes in. McKay lock stitch was the way to connect everything together on the inside and then do the stitch down for the outsole, the midsole and the outsole.
Yeah, but you
Because
don't.
the midsole and the outsole are not the only two things to connect.
Yeah, correct.
So when you do like Nick's is doing now, and you skip that McKay lock stitch, you no longer have your insole connected to anything at all.
Correct. It's floating or with glue. Yeah. But it's also held in place by friction from the fact that everything wrapping around it is holding it in place. Because the insole is in place. When the uppers are pushed down around it, it's being held from both sides in. Obviously, a sucking force could theoretically pull it up, but you also have clinch nails coming in from the heel stopping that from happening. I mean, the McKay lock stitch is not necessary. Where the McKay lock stitch's strength comes from is in needing to resole it. What Nick's change has done is when you go to resole it, if you separate them too quickly and yank too hard, without that McKay lock stitch in place, the insole just moves, bam, you just lost your sizing. Right? The McKay lock stitch is a redundant stitch in terms of rebuildability and maintaining the shoe over 1 or 2 resoles. Not so much a 100% necessary construction in the building of the boot, because there's another construction that doesn't do anything with the with the insole at all that leaves it in place, and that is the traditional Norwegian welt, where it's punched through the upper. There's nothing holding your insole in place in a traditional Norwegian welt, because the upper is what's being stitched to the midsole, not the insole itself. The midsole itself is held in place in the lasting process, basically just being glued down to the uppers that are folded under it. And that's the exact same process where the insole is essentially floating as well. Well, minus glue, obviously. But there's no mechanical stitching on a traditional Norwegian welt that is holding it in place. It's punching through the upper itself. So I'm saying the Norwegian roll welt, there's really nothing Norwegian or stitched down about it. It's really just a hand welt. At the end of the day, it's operating the same way that a traditional hand welt would operate. And it's even creating a cavity that would exist in a hand welt as well, too. That doesn't exist in a Norwegian welt or in a stitched down welt.
Be less of a cavity because it's being folded out, so the piece that would create the cavity isn't there. It's laying flat outside.
Yeah, but there's still a cavity still there because there's stuff carved out. If you look at Sean's boot, you can see. I would use another example if I had another picture of one easily available, opened up, but the cavity still exists in the process. Traditional hand welt, because everywhere is carved for pieces to roll over, everything sits naturally in a spot, and you're just covering up the ditch of stitches, essentially, right? But in the case of the way that, like say if you look at Sean's boot, the way it's done, you can see a very clear cavity exists, and it's a combination of, everything being brought down to the edge, cut flat, that channel being cut, it being pulled over, creates a slight U shape, and then there's a cavity there that's filled with that squeak pad. And obviously, as we've talked about with the notorious white squeak, there's enough cavity left that squeak pad can move. And when it does move, you get, the notorious squeak.
Understand what that piece of leather's doing.
It's acting as a welt. It's essentially no different than like the piece you've seen the cobbler sew on that's upside down, that's natural. They're literally doing that, but it's upside down, so it rolls over those stitches so they're not exposed. The piece of leather is only put on upside down to cover what would be visible stitches up. Like, so for example, if we take this one right here, if he installed the piece upside down and didn't do this decorative stitch, right? And instead of it being smooth side up, he installed it the same way that piece was rough side up. He could then literally pull it down over, stitch down, and all these stitches would be covered, right? It's just installing the Norwegian welt upside down to protect the stitches. That's what it's doing. It is the simple answer.
So wish you had a picture of a Goodyear being in the middle of production. Because I don't understand why you think. I don't understand why you think that the stitching on a Goodyear welt is going through the midsole and the insole and the vamp.
So
If it's going through all of those things, then that piece, that welt piece, not welt piece, yeah, welt piece would be unnecessary. The whole point is so that it doesn't go through everything.
well,
It's an in between.
that's what I was getting at. So you have the gimming, the uppers, and those are stapled together normally in the Goodyear welting machine. They'll staple the uppers to the gimming. It lasts it down, puts the staples in, and then a welt's placed up against it that has a 20-degree angle, and the jerk needle for the welt stitch, just the welt, not the outsole stitch, is passed from the welt through the uppers, through the gimming, and pulled in a chain stitch. So it's just doing a chain stitch, meaning any one breaks, you can pull the whole welt off, right? Once that's done, the welt is taken from its position where it's folded like this, turned out to here, and then the welt is outsole stitched from the welt through the midsole, through the outsole. So there's two separate stitches holding the whole construction together. And that gimming is what creates that large cavity that needs to be filled with, 2 to 3 millimeters of cork or more, right? That's what a Goodyear welt is doing. The Goodyear welting process is taking the hand welting process and simplifying it by adding synthetic pieces that wouldn't exist in the hand welting process just for essentially time. It is the, what do they call it? Great value version of hand welting, essentially. Right? In this case, in the Norwegian welt, what they're doing, or the rolled Norwegian welt, the one we're talking about here, in the way that White's is doing it, I'm going to exclude the way Frank's is doing it because you're right. In Frank's method, that piece is completely redundant. It's doing literally nothing. What they're doing is they are doing that same thing, but instead of a gimming, they're carving into the midsole. So they're going welt into uppers / lining. We're just going to call it uppers because lots of dress shoes have lining too.
Right.
Yeah.
It always goes together.
Yeah. Welt into into uppers, into midsole, and being pulled tight that way. And then when it's done, instead of it all being installed on the same plane, upside down like a Goodyear welt machine, they've installed it upside down so that when they go to outsole stitch it, it pulls down and covers those stitches. If they literally installed it the other direction, the stitches you see them doing would be visible. Like they're just installing it upside down to cover the stitches. And that's a work way of doing Norwegian so that your stitches aren't, getting damaged by getting scratched and stuff. That's the whole reason of the rolling, is so that when the roll, instead of the welt being pulled straight down and stitched directly down where the stitches are visible, it's installed upside down so it's pulled over the top of them to protect them with leather. But like I said, in the case of like your zucchinis there that you showed where everything's been flared out, yeah, you're right. The extra piece they stitched on literally does nothing. It just put holes in the upper for no reason. Because the stitch down part was being flared out anyway. They just added what is essentially an aesthetic piece on the outside.
You go back into Discord, I put 2 more photos, and you can see where it's all literally folded outward.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. That's what I mean. The fact that it all gets folded out means the extra piece of leather did 0. So if you look at Sean's boot, which is every White's boot that I've seen cut open, whether it's on Potter's and Sons, Steve from Beato's, doesn't matter. The pieces that they're folding out there from the bottom that you see them folding out, that last one where it's got the liner, some zucchini, and then that piece, they would cut that flush with the bottom. All those pieces that were left internally, they will cut flush with the bottom and just sew through the welt. That's why, like on this piece right here, my welt is so thin in comparison to yours, because it's just the welt piece. It's not the welt and the uppers together. That's why you also can't see where my toe cap joint is, because it's just welt. There's no uppers in this stitching at all. It's just welt. I mean, you see by how thin it is. Because you're right, my uppers, if you look just from the side, like this upper piece right here that's been skived is way thicker than this piece is right here. It's not even close.
I think there's two different conversations at this point. One of them is looking at your whites, where it seems clear that the vamp is not actually folded outward, in which case the piece that's being folded outward is being stitched to the vamp somewhere.
Yep.
And then the vamp itself is being stitched down to the midsole, basically doing the same thing as a McKay.
It's not. I'm guessing on this part. A McKay is a chain stitch, just like a Goodyear welt machine. I'm assuming they're saddle stitching it, so it would go the piece that was sewn on through the upper into the midsole and saddle stitched, which is twist, lock, pull, not traditional chain like McKay. Because McKay, if you break any stitch, you can pull all of them out as well, right? But there is no McKay stitch in that. It is just.
No, the McKay is lock stitched. It's part of the title. McKay lock stitch.
Yeah, but if you cut any part of the McKay, you can pull it. It's in the chain. Like, it's not like loop pulled in the same way like a saddle stitch is, where it's like double looped, twisted through, and pulled. Like, it can be separated. Because McKay lock stitch's original method was meant for what's called Blake rapid stitching, where you would stitch it internally like the McKay, and then you stitch down on the outside with no welt. That's how they.
And it's not a lock stitch.
Well, like I said, in that chain on the McKay, you can cut one and pull it, and one side of it will come out.
Okay. Well, then it would be a McKay chain stitch, not a McKay lock stitch.
I didn't patent the machine. I know you can cut and pull it. So.
The second related conversation is my green ones, which I've now showed 3 photos of that I had snapshot from a video. In that situation, the vamp is clearly folded outward.
Yep. You could tell because it's got a brown core.
So when Franks does what they're calling a Norwegian hand welt, they're not doing the same thing as Whites does when they say they're doing a Norwegian hand welt.
Correct. Yeah.
They're doing a different process.
Yeah.
And it looks like the Franks one is the one that's done better or proper, as I would consider proper, since it's folded outward. Everything I read everywhere says that a Norwegian hand welt, Norwegian rolled hand welt, is
people use these terms loosely a lot. The way Franks is doing it, the downside to it is you're gaining nothing out of the rolled welt part, except for, I guess, no need for the McKay lock stitch. But you're poking holes into uppers for no reason. You'd be better off just not doing it.
No, nobody's ever, at least not me, and I know not you, but nobody said that the McKay, that the that the Norwegian is better.
No.
On the contrary, I know the Norwegian is not better. So it's not a matter of what's better. The Norwegian would only be chosen because it's more traditional, or so we think.
I wouldn't even call it traditional. The traditional Norwegian is the style I showed on the blue, where it's punched through the upper and that welt can be replaced. Like I said, the way that Franks is doing it, you could never replace that piece, and it's not really serving a purpose. At least the way Whites is doing it, you could replace that piece of leather and potentially save yourself a rebuild. Like, it's possible, right? But the fact that they're folding the uppers out like that, it's not really worth punching extra holes in the upper for that. Like, that's kind of where the difference there is. Because it's a Norwegian rolled weld. It's supposed to be, Norwegian. This is a Norwegian welt. Like I said, there's very clearly holes punched in the uppers, and I could replace this welt piece if I had to, and not lose the shape of the boot if I used the same holes, right? But with the flared out upper,
your third stitch is going into the vamp.
yes, correct.
Not everything.
Yeah. Just the middle stitch of the 3. Yeah. If you take the decorative stitch out and just made it the saddle stitch that it is, it would look just like a, I don't know, pair of Doc Martens or whatever, right? Where there's just one going flat across it. And that could be replaced and the shape of this would be maintained, right? But if and then this piece right here flares out and goes over the top of this piece. So that's what that little gap is there's a piece there. So it's just, think of it as like a piece of 90-degree angle iron, right? Except instead of welding it to 2 sections of the building, we've, screwed concrete into it, or concrete screws into it, right? That's essentially what this is. So like if I replace this, I'll keep the shape of the boot with nothing else. But the problem with the piece that you have is because they've flared the uppers out, even if you put another piece on there, you still need the flared uppers that are now going to be eaten up in the sanding process. So replacing it wouldn't allow you to just replace the welt to do more resoles, because you've now lost a huge chunk of your upper that would traditionally just been cut off and brought down completely flat.
Okay. I mean, that's been a problem about whether you're talking about Norwegian or whether you're talking about just a stitch down. That's the problem about everything that the P&W does, and we already know that.
Yep.
And we've dismissed it as okay in that construction because you're wearing out the lower leather,
Yep.
so much that you just do a rebuild and you replace it. So you resole these as many times as you can, where all you're fucking with is the midsole. You're not fucking with the vamp. It doesn't fucking matter. You can, assuming everything stays in good shape, you could resole it a bunch of times, maybe 6 times. But when you have a problem with the construction, meaning the midsole is compromised, that's when you'd be facing the other problem, the problem that would affect the upper, not the upper, the lower.
Yeah. The vamp leather. Yes.
The industry uses those terms 2 different ways. When we're talking about like midsole and whatnot, people say the uppers, but you're talking about this.
The vamp. Yeah,
that's
we're talking
not
about the vamp leather.
Yep. This is an upper.
Yep.
So, but at any rate, yes, the construction that the P&Ws use is limited in that respect, and you're not going to get as much. You're not going to be able to wear them for as often and repair them as often because of the way that they do it. But because these are rebuildable, and everything except for the upper up here gets replaced, and the vamp gets replaced, and then you do your construction all over again. That's why it's okay. That's why what you're saying doesn't matter.
Yep. But what I'm saying is the way Whites does this, I could just replace this piece, and I don't need to rebuild all of this. I could just do this part. Because this is a separate piece, and just like the way Sean took it apart, all you got to do is when you take it out, you remove this piece, use all the same holes to sew it back on, and I can actually do a resole of this with a compromised midsole without doing a whole rebuild. That's the whole point of the Norwegian roll welt construction. That's the only reason you would pay more for this versus a traditional stitch down. Is I could fix all the compromised pieces with this. But with the way Frank's has done that one, you can't do that anymore.
So then White's isn't doing a Norwegian rolled welt.
They're doing a Norwegian rolled welt, not a Norwegian stitch down roll welt. It's just a they've doing a
No,
Norwegian
they're
welt they've installed upside down. That's what I'm saying. That's what the Norwegian roll welt is. It's just a upside down. I definition wise.
if they were doing a Norwegian rolled welt, they'd be rolling the vamp outward, and you've clearly showed me that they're not rolling the vamp outward.
Yeah.
So they're not doing a Norwegian rolled welt.
Well,
They're doing a Norwegian welt where they folded it in and left it in.
well, there's so
And they've got an extra piece that's
yeah, that's the
patching on the outside.
That's the Norwegian welt.
So it's an external vamp.
No, it's an external welt. It's a separate welt. It's a different piece.
Sorry.
So, yep. Correct.
I misspoke.
Yeah.
I didn't mean vamp.
Yep.
It would be an external welt.
Yep. But that's what I mean. So people use Norwegian rolled welt multiple ways. The reason it's a rolled welt is it's rolled over the stitches, so the stitches are protected. That's what a Norwegian rolled welt. When you search on the internet, a lot of people construe like what a Norwegian roll welt is and what a stitch down Norwegian roll welt is. Now it sucks because White's has marketed this as a stitch down Norwegian roll welt, right? That is something we see time and time again. This is just a Norwegian roll welt, which is a traditional Norwegian welt that's installed backwards. That way it covers the stitches. There's nothing technically stitched down about this. This would be like calling a hand welted boot a hand welted stitch down boot. Just because a machine stitches these down doesn't make it stitch down, right? And that's just White's fucking marketeering, wanketeering terms. This right here, this Norwegian roll welt, is a Norwegian roll welt in the aspect that it is installed upside down and rolled over the top, and a roll is created right here, and that roll is the covering of the stitches. That's it. Now, there is, like I said, people just have used these terms intermingly over the last 50 years, so I'm sure there's all kinds of weird stuff going on. But a Norwegian welt, traditionally, a Norwegian welt is just like a hand welt. It's got a separate piece. There's no Norwegian welt that isn't using an external welt or a separate welt piece. That's what a Norwegian welt is. Now, like I said, Norwegian stitched, rolled, stitched down, whatever the fuck White's calls this these days, is not what this is. This is just a Norwegian rolled welt. There's no stitch down. There's none of that crap. It's a Norwegian welt. It's no different than this Norwegian welt that uses a separate piece, except for this piece was installed right side up. That's the only difference. Like if he took this piece, which folds out like this, and installed it upside down the way White's did and folds it out like that, it would look just like the White's rolled welt. It'd be no different at that point. It's just a standard Norwegian welt. Like I said, I know they use stitch down in the name of that, but there's nothing stitched down about that.
The outer stitch is a stitch down. The inner stitch is not.
No. Once again, White's fucketeering, right? It's not. So see, you see this one out here on the outside stops here. The outer stitch is just the outsole stitch. The inner stitch is just them being fucking lazy because this is a lug sole, and they only stitched it through the midsole. If this was a V-bar, you would see both of them going through the bottom. They're both just outsole stitches. No different than the outsole stitches on a hand welt. They just don't do both because it's a lug. Like if this was V-bar, both of them would be present here, or what the other one, the 430, the mini lug. Because once again, how often do you actually see them even stitch this all the way down? And the reason once again, I don't even know why they stitch all the way through it, because there is a slip sole here. Like the slip sole does exist. So usually they don't even stitch through lug at all. They would just stitch the slip sole.
I would need to pull a lot more photos that are going to take me a lot more time to find. Try to continue this conversation, but I'm not satisfied right now with what you're saying, what's being said. I guess that the way that you're showing it to me on the Whites is they're using rolled welt to mean that there's a separate leather welt that is being connected to the midsole on the outside and connected to the vamp on the other side, and that it's a removable, replaceable piece.
Yes, it's like every
And
other
and
Norwegian
if
welt.
and
Not
I can
yeah.
see, I can logically see and physically see that that makes sense, and that it's actually using welt, physical welt. Although every definition I've seen or heard of in Norwegian says that the definition of it is not having physical welt.
That's the definition of stitch down. Norwegians always had a welt. Because Norwegian, the definition of a Norwegian welt just means it has to pass through the uppers. Stitch down generally has no physical. Oh shit, that is work calling. We're gonna have to cut this one short here because that sand I think just exploded. Exploded.
Is a 2-hour video, almost twice as long as all of them, so it's not cut short. Probably the best time to end it, because I need to find more photographs as of examples, and part of those photographs is going to be examples of Goodyear welting, because the way that you're describing Goodwill welting makes zero sense to me.
Okay.
I was going to draw a picture just now, but you got to go, and like I said, the video is already long enough, so I guess it'll be another video.
For the future. And the dramas.
All right, man. Good luck with work.
Yep, sure it's not going to go well. In fact, someone's calling means that sand went.
All right. Cheers, everybody.
Cheers. Like, comment,
Hope you
subscribe.
enjoyed.
Hope you enjoyed this one. This one was a wild ride. We took the Bill and Ted journey. Now, was it the awesome adventure or the bogus journey? We'll find out. Good night, everybody.
Night.